Redditors who work at cemeteries and graveyards, what strange and scary stuff have you witnessed? In the cemetery mausoleum chapel, where I occasionally play the organ for funerals, vandals had broken in the night before a service. They smashed several crypt covers, probably with sledgehammers, exposing the remains of those that had been entombed therein. It was an eerie atmosphere to hold a funeral service that morning, with such desecration in plain sight. My dad purchased a cemetery when I was in middle school, and I worked for him through high school graduation. I did yard work, mowing, weed eating, flower beds, aside from the occasional shadow seen out of the corner of my eye, seeing people who turned out to not be there, and hearing strange sounds. The cemetery was actually a quite peaceful place, but the strangest is when you have a burial in the crypts. Basically, you dig down about 4 or 5 feet to expose giant cement doors. You pull the cement doors off and drop down into a little room. These rooms can fit 2 coffins, or years and years and years worth of cremated remains. So back in the 50s and 60s, families would buy one crypt and the entire fam would be cremated and put in it. Some just put the cremated remains in it and close her up, but others light candles and leave flowers and souvenirs and pictures and shit. It's fucking creepy opening up one of those bad boys after 50 years, and finding melted candles and old pictures of the people inside. Plus when you hop down in there, you have a weird realization that you are at the same level, and completely surrounded by bodies. I used to do some odd jobs at the 12th century graveyard in my hometown. 12th century, as in the church and its surrounding graveyard had been in continuous use for at least that long. When you keep burying bodies in the same small patch of ground for that many centuries, eventually the soil has been turned over dozens of times and consists mainly of bone fragments. You can't even plant flowers there without accidentally uncovering some teeth or finger bones or something. It's nothing but fragmented skeletons all the way down under the thin turf. The soil sort of resembles seaside shell sand, except on closer examination all the light-colored bits are bone fragments rather than crushed seashells. Not really scary or unexpected, just a bit eerie until you get used to it. You learn to treat anything recognizable as human remains with respect, and just tuck it away out of sight under the plant or whatever else you were putting there. I was a tombstone caretaker for a cemetery in rural Georgia. Summertime job for a 16-year-old. Nothing crazy, just cleaning off the grime of the elements on tombstones. Now to just put a setting, the cemetery included one building that housed bathrooms for the 5 staff members of the cemetery, a small simple mausoleum, and then other than that, flat earth with tombstones everywhere. The only surroundings were dense forests in the Georgia country. That being said, due to the eerie surroundings, I was always a bit paranoid, plus I watch a lot of scary movies and so on. I know, bad combo. So one night I was doing my rounds, and I had to go into the small mausoleum, had some of the richer families in the areas entombed within, and I had to go in, make sure all was neat and clean. Standards had to be upheld for these uppity folks, so I approached, and right off the bat, something was off. The air was pretty damn cold. During the summer in Georgia, that was odd. There was a light coming from the mausoleum, and as I approached, I heard voices, laughter from a child, a little girl. I thought it was simply younger folks maybe. I haven't seen anyone enter or leave the cemetery, and the laughter sounded young. However, as I got closer, the voices and laughter died, like almost instant. I pause. The light I also noticed had gone out. I call the lone security officer that does a few rounds on the lot, cause I'm not gonna go in alone, and he comes. We will call him Officer Friendly. When Officer Friendly arrives, we both go inside. We see one of the doors to the entombed remains of a young girl open. Nothing was disturbed within, but it was open, and a doll lay on the stone beneath it. Me and Officer Friendly do a small sweep. It was only 1 floor in 1 room, so it didn't take long. We close the door to the girl's entombment, and we both leave. As we walk away, we get about 30 feet from the mausoleum, and then all of a sudden, boom, voices and laughter again. I jump, and Officer Friendly looks to me, looking pretty shaken, says to me, "You hear it too?" We look back, and boom, lights back, laughter continuing. We don't go back and just book it. I found out the next morning, the door was open again. This time the doll was on the other side of the mausoleum from where we found it the night before. Former funeral director here. One of our workers cleaned up after everyone had left from a visitation/viewing/wake. It was about 9 p.m. or later and he saw one last guest walking around in the visitation room. He went to help escort the gentleman out when he discovered no one was in there. When he came back in and told us the story and described the visitor, he identified the man in a photo we had at the funeral home. It was my grandfather family business who had recently passed. A man would come and sit in a folding chair at the burial plot of his wife. Brought the paper and books to read, his lunch and a small portable radio with him. He would lay a large towel down and take a nap on her grave. About a month of doing this every day, and laying on her plot, he ended his life by shooting himself in his heart. I thought it a really beautiful final act of devotion he gave, and was in complete respect for this man. We had a late afternoon service once that ran into the evening. It was October, so the sun went down early while I was filling in the grave afterwards. Conveniently, none of the lights on the loader tractor worked for some reason. No blown fuses or loose wires or anything, the lights just didn't work. Next day when I reported the issue, we went over to the same tractor and the lights worked perfectly fine, and they worked fine the rest of the time I worked there. Despite all the rational reasons there likely are to explain this. Yeah, that's pretty creepy. Tangential, but in 2008 my childhood dog passed. We buried him in the backyard. On one occasion I was mowing the lawn and had to try to start the mower right next to his plot. If I was directly next to where we buried him, the mower would not start. Weird experience. I work at a graveyard, and I just have one thing to say: plastic. Here in Norway, graves are protected by law for 20 years. But after that the spots can be reused. Usually a grave is fine to reopen after 20 years. The body is supposed to be decomposed and pretty much gone. Now back to plastic. Between the 50s and 80s it was common here to be buried in plastic, to minimize smell and leakage. I'm sure they thought it was a good idea back then, but once we started reusing graves in Norway we realized it is a curse. A lot of bodies are wrapped in plastic, and I have myself been part of what was supposed to be a burial at a reused site. The body was about 50 or 60 years old, and should be basically gone, but nope, it was not. The plastic wrap it was covered by kept the body from decomposing, and it's basically just been marinated in its own juices for 50/60 years. The smell was awful, the sight was even worse. I'm sure this is not the kind of story you wanted, but it's honestly the most horrific and bizarre thing I've ever been part of. I worked for a county cemetery department years ago. We would go to all the cemeteries in the county and mow or just do basic upkeep. Occasionally people, mainly farmers, would stumble upon some headstones in a field or a stand of trees, and we would come out and prod the ground with dowel rods to find more headstones and re-establish the cemetery. Soon after I started working there we got a tip about some headstones a farmer found while clearing out a path through some trees for easier access to his field. It turned out to be the oldest cemetery in the county, dating back to the 1700s. After investigating some of the names on the headstones it got really creepy. The story is that before the cemetery was there a schoolhouse stood there. The teachers were a husband and wife. It's not clear on what exactly happened, but the students and the husband and wife all died in the schoolhouse. The information we found kind of made it sound like an illness of some kind, and they were all quarantined in the school until they all died. After that the school was demolished and the students and husband and wife were all buried right where the school stood. So yeah, I'm sure it's haunted. It's not quite the same, but I had an uncle who tried working as in selling and doing drugs the graveyards between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. He only lasted a few nights in that area, then never went back. What was it that scared him so badly that he felt his soul rattle in his bones, as his blood froze cold? Prairie dogs. Fucking prairie dogs. What's so frightening about simple ground squirrels, you might ask? Those cute little fuzzballs that scavenge whatever they can. Well, apparently they like to randomly come out their holes in the middle of the night and scream. Creepy, but that doesn't sound too bad, right? Well, now imagine being surrounded by dozens of little rodents you can't see, in the pitch black of night, surrounded by the dead, tweaked out of your mind, paranoid as hell, and then suddenly hearing hellish blood-curdling screaming all around you. His little group scattered like roaches, and I think someone fell into a ditch, but he was convinced it was an empty grave. He never did that again. Former funeral director here. My partner and I had just gotten back to the funeral home from a house call for a 31-year-old woman who died of cancer. As we were moving her body from the cot to embalming table, we heard an audible click in the radio across the room turned on full volume of static. It's one of those old radios you turn the volume dial until it clicks to turn it on. We both looked at each other. He was an extremely religious man and this event visibly shook him, and he left not long after the incident. I shut the radio off as I typically used my phone to listen to music while embalming. When I had finished the procedure and was attempting to move her from the embalming table to a dressing table, I heard that click from that old radio and it turned on full volume yet again. At that point I was fairly freaked out and made my exit not long after. My partner and I never spoke of it again, and nothing like that ever occurred to my knowledge before or after. When I was in college, I worked part-time at a Jewish cemetery in reception/office management. The cemetery was closed from Friday afternoon through Saturday evening for Sabbath. We sometimes stayed a bit later in the office on Friday afternoons to get bills out or checks processed. We heard a loud commotion by the cemetery entrance, which was locked and only staff could get in and out. The office manager went to see what was going on and made me come with her. We went down to the gate to find an older woman, probably around 70, dressed to the nines, begging us to let her in. She kept saying she needed to get back. This was in the suburbs of NJ, so you needed a car to get around, but we didn't see a car or anything. She was just there in this beautiful dress. We couldn't open the gate without the cemetery manager, so we went to go get him. We brought him back to the gate and no one was there. We looked at video footage of the entrance and you could see us, the office manager and me, talking, but there was no one on the other side of the gate. The cemetery manager thought we were trying to trick him. I swear to this day we saw a woman in a fancy dress outside the gate. There were multiple cameras and not a single one picked up anyone on the other side of the gate, and you could see the whole gate. All you could see was us. I don't know if it was a ghost or what. The office manager and I decided not to tell anyone else, but we would mention it to each other every once in a while. Thank you a lot for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel.